Americans have long been the biggest consumers on the planet, and American consumption has grown and grown over time. Americans bought 68 new items of clothing last year, a huge increase from the 12 items a year that they used to buy in the 1980s. Their spending on that clothing, however, has fallen. In the 1980s, the average American spent 7% of their annual income on clothing, while today they just spend 3%. So for less than half of the spending, shoppers today are getting almost 6 times as many items. According to JP Morgan, since the turn of the century, real personal consumption growth in the United States, meaning inflation-adjusted consumption growth, averaged 2.5%. But in the second half of 2023, that rose above 3%, even with the higher interest rates and elevated but declining inflation. Consumer spending accounts for almost 70% of US GDP, and while consumption in Europe has grown over time too, Europeans tend to spend less time at work than Americans, do more work at home, and they have lower overall consumption. For decades, the American consumer has powered not just the world's biggest economy, but the entire global economy. According to the World Bank, Americans make up around 1/3 of global consumer spending, but are only 4% of the global population. We should only be so surprised by this. Americans are amongst the most productive workers in the world, and thus are amongst the best paid. The fact that they're both busy and highly paid makes them naturally big consumers. Over the last 50 years, the United States has had just 4 significant dips in consumer spending, the biggest having occurred in 2020 when the global pandemic struck. At the start of the pandemic, Americans slashed all spending, and we saw a massive boost in personal savings as the government pumped a load of money into the economy. Nobody was traveling, people couldn't eat out, they didn't lose their jobs and could suddenly work from home. Most Americans continued to earn money and were simply spending less. Poorer Americans who lived paycheck to paycheck suddenly had free time for the first time in their working lives, and due to stimulus checks also had savings, which many had never really had before. People's bank accounts grew, and once the COVID restrictions started to ease, they went on a spending spree. While Americans stopped spending on restaurants, vacations, and their daily commutes during the pandemic, they spent much more on physical goods. They cancelled gym memberships and bought things like treadmills. During that period, the world spent 5% more on physical goods, but the undefeated American consumer spent 10% more. I asked my viewers in a community post what goods Americans buy that the rest of the world doesn't. The most popular answer was guns and ammo. There were also huge trucks and, of course, truck nuts. Whenever I see things like that, I always imagine how confused the Chinese factory workers who make them must be. I imagine they have long conversations in the evening with their friends and families about who buys these things and what for. There's no way around it, though. Americans do love spending, and not just on necessities like tattoos, baseball caps, massive water bottles, and aerosol cheese. I spoke to a friend a few years ago who told me that she rents a storage space to keep her seasonal decorations. I made the mistake of assuming that she meant Christmas decorations, only to learn that there are many more holidays that require inflatable decorations, and that the Christmas decorations really only took up about 10% of her storage locker. American shoppers love convenience too. Not only are there drive-through liquor stores in the United States, there are drive-through bars too. Some even seem to offer Sunday morning discounts. In Louisiana, the Strawberry Daiquiri, it appears, is the breakfast of champions. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Americans spend twice as much on jewelry, watches, books, and phones today as they did 25 years ago. New American homes are almost 25% bigger today than they were 25 years ago, and Americans throw away 5 times more consumer waste than they did in 1980. A lot of this is driven by goods deflation, where things like clothing, furniture, and electronics are cheaper than they've ever been before. But the goods have often fallen in price because they've declined in quality too. Before we dig into that, let me tell you about this week's video sponsor, Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that finds and removes your personal data that's being collected by data brokers and sold online. Data brokers are businesses that collect huge amounts of personally identifiable information on individuals and package it up to create profiles which can include things like social security numbers, birthdays, past and recent addresses, information about your family, and much more. This data can be used by identity thieves or online stalkers who want to harass or dox you. You're legally entitled to protect your privacy by requesting that data brokers delete the information that they store on you. But unfortunately, there are hundreds of data brokers and they don't make it easy to get off their lists. It could take forever to do this on your own. I used Delete Me to reach out to the hundreds of data brokers on my behalf to request the deletion of my personal data and to deal with any objections. I got a full report back showing where my data was removed from. With a yearly subscription, Delete Me tracks them and makes sure that they don't re-add your data to their lists. Remove your personal information from the web using the link in the description and use code BOYLE for 20% off. I started out with the statistic that Americans are spending a much lower percentage of their income on clothing today than they did in the 1980s, but getting almost 6 times as many items. A big difference, as many people my age will know, is that the quality of those items has declined significantly over time too. I really noticed this a few years ago when one of my favorite shirts was getting a bit old, and I went online to see if I could find the exact same one to buy. Not only was I able to find it, but the price was cheaper than I remembered. When it arrived in the post, however, and I held it up next to the old one, it was made of a thinner, cheaper fabric, the stitching was worse, and it just didn't fit the way the old one had. I went online to return it, and instead of sending me a shipping label, the seller just gave me a full refund and told me to throw it out. I looked online to find old clothing adverts from the 1980s so that I could compare the prices of similar items you can buy today. This Sears catalogue from 1980 shows a sport coat for $90 and a top coat for $130. Both of these items were on sale at the time. If we adjust for inflation, the sport coat costs $350 and the top coat over $500 in 2025 dollars. Going to the Sears website today, they have a $50 blazer and a $140 top coat, so quite a bit cheaper than in the past. The 1980 advert, you'll notice, focused on the quality of the materials. The wool is hand-woven Harris tweed from Scotland. The advert tells us about the lining and the leather wrap buttons too. You'll notice that both items come in a number of different sizes. The modern item, which is celebrity endorsed, gives us none of that information, other than that it can cause cancer and reproductive harm to California residents, which is really why I'd never lived there. And the top coat is one size fits all, which I guess makes sense as we're all the same size nowadays. If your dad bought that tweed blazer 45 years ago, he likely still has it in his closet today. While if you're planning on buying either of the new items, I'd recommend having them shipped straight to the landfill to cut out the middleman. Should we look at the quality of the photo they're using to advertise that top coat? They clearly spared no cost in putting that advert together. It's aimed squarely at the man who uses Siri or Alexa to buy his clothes. Alexa, buy me a coat. No, I don't live in California. That shouldn't affect me. It'll be fine. The way the clothing industry works has changed a lot over the years. In the 1980s, it used to take around 9 months for an item of clothing to be designed. A big store like Sears would then order each item in bulk in a variety of different sizes, and these items would be available in the store for maybe 6 months. If they didn't sell, this was a problem, and for this reason a lot of thought went into finding the right items and providing quality at every price point. The term fast fashion first appeared in 1989 in a New York Times article about a new retailer at the time called Zara. Zara, they explained, was able to go from idea to having an item in the store in 15 days because they had built a network of factories around their headquarters in Spain. They would manufacture small test batches of clothing, ship them to the stores, discontinue the ones that didn't sell, and ramp production in the items that customers bought. Their approach didn't require them to predict trends. They just had to respond quickly to demand. They were able to make copies of high-end designer clothes within weeks and make them available cheaply by using low-quality fabrics and zips. Fast fashion brands, over time, started putting spandex in everything, as the more the fabric stretches, the fewer sizes you have to make. This reduces manufacturing costs even further, but it also means that clothes never really fit all that well to begin with, and they wear out very quickly. The same sort of thing that happened with clothing happened with furniture too. People were happy to buy disposable furniture as long as it was cheap and on trend. We started to see manufactured goods where plastic was used where metal used to go, and glue was used instead of fasteners. These new products were cheap, which people really like, but they didn't actually last. Chinese brands like Shein and Temu managed to undercut Zara by moving even faster, having no physical stores, not owning the factories, instead treating them like Uber drivers hooked up to an app, and exploiting a tax loophole known as the de minimis exemption. The de minimis exemption became law in the United States in 1930 to allow Americans to skip import duties for small value shipments. It was put in place so that people could bring souvenirs home from their holidays without being taxed. Most countries around the world have a version of this rule, but the United States had the highest exemption rate of $800 per item. Americans who've ordered goods from another country online that cost less than $800 over the last 10 years have benefited from the de minimis exemption. If they had bought the exact same item from a local store, the price would have been quite a bit higher, as it would have had to include the cost of manufacturing, shipping, warehousing, along with the store's rent and the wages of the US employee who works there. Both Republicans and Democrats have talked about ending this exemption for quite some time, as it made it impossible for stores to compete with brands like Temu and Shein, who could avoid most of those costs and pay none of the taxes or fees a larger volume importer would have to pay. The de minimis loophole hasn't yet closed, but it's about to. Starting on May 2nd, packages from China will be hit with a 120% tax on the value of goods or a $100 flat fee, which increases to $200 per package this June. With the dollar almost 10% off its January highs, massive tariffs on imported goods in place, and big American businesses announcing layoffs, the all-conquering American consumer might finally slow down. One of the oldest sayings on Wall Street is that you should never bet against the American consumer. The people who buy truck nuts don't put their credit cards down that easily. According to Juliet Schor, a sociologist at Boston College, the key driver of consumer spending in America is the role that consumption plays in establishing an individual's position in an unequal society. She says that Americans consume to keep up with their social group. According to her research, people who have reference groups that are wealthier than they are tend to spend more to keep up, and people who have more modest reference groups, even as they gain in income and wealth, tend to save more. According to Scientific American, 6 to 7% of Americans say that they have a shopping addiction, and research shows that online shopping is more addictive than in-store shopping, as buyers get both the thrill of buying and then the excitement of delivery a few days later. Shopping apps like Temu use gamification to draw in customers, where shoppers describe it as feeling like an online casino. A Penn State paper analyzing shopping behavior found that compulsive shoppers tend to search for relatively cheap items when shopping, but then buy lots of them. Apparently, shoes, jewelry, and cosmetics rank among the top 5 categories of compulsive shoppers' purchases. With high import tariffs kicking in and the end of the de minimis exemption on the horizon, Americans can expect to see significant price inflation in the near future, unless all of these new rules are rolled back, as well may happen. The press is reporting that many Americans have already rushed out to stock up on goods before the prices rise. There was a big spike in new car purchases last month, as buyers who may have been holding off on buying a new car rushed out to get one for fear that the prices would be much higher if they waited any longer. Bloomberg reports that Americans rushed out to replace their iPhones too before prices go up. Many Americans are reported to be cutting back on spending on services like restaurants, hotels, and haircuts as they prepare for an economic slowdown. New York Magazine reports that Chinese websites like Shein and Temu are raising prices starting on April 25th, and shipping companies like FedEx and UPS have already added a surge fee for goods entering the US from China. Some people have argued that if prices go up due to tariffs, that Americans will just start buying smaller quantities of higher quality goods. There's no real reason to believe that, however. Typically, tariffs drive up the price of imported goods, but they also allow domestic producers to increase their prices, which they typically do. Ramon Van Meer, who runs a business selling shower heads, ran an experiment on his website last week to see how many buyers would pay more for an American manufactured shower head. He gave shoppers the option to buy a $129 made in Asia shower head or the same product but made in America for $239, the price it would cost. He sold 584 of the made in Asia shower heads and no made in America ones. Apparently, American Apparel ran a similar experiment in 2017 with a much more modest price difference, and the majority of customers still chose the cheaper imported version. The Atlantic reports that trends like zero-waste households, capsule wardrobes, and minimalism are generating more and more interest amongst Americans who are concerned about the waste they create. Farrakalik reports that stores selling second-hand goods are poised to benefit from the new tariffs as consumers look to avoid higher prices by searching for higher quality second-hand goods at lower prices. The moral critique of consumerism is that buying goods can displace more worthwhile activities or more important priorities. But consumption does also create jobs, stimulate economic growth, and can increase our quality of life and standard of living. If you found this video interesting, you should watch my video on the luxury goods bubble next. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Delete Me, using the link in the description. Talk to you in the next video. Bye.